Now, in Myth of the Lazy Native, if I'm not mistaken, 1968 or is it 1970, the Myth of the Lazy Native, there is a direct critique of Munshi Abdullah, where it is a very objective critique. Much of my description of Munshi Abdullah earlier is similar to Syed Hussein Alatas's, where he locates Munshi Abdullah as being a product of a very confused time, where we have a moment of transition where on one hand the positive benefits of modernity were coming through the negative impact of colonization. And so on one hand he critiques Munshi Abdullah for being too pro-modernity, but on the other hand he defends Munshi Abdullah for being still committed to what was essentially Islamic reform. Then when you read Chandra Muzaffar's Protector, which is this is really an excellent book, by the way. It's out of print, but you should try to get it. Protector, question mark, an analysis of leader-led relations in Malay politics, I think. Protector, question mark. An analysis of leader-led relations in Malay politics or Malay political culture, something like that, but the main title is Protector, question mark. Chandra also has a critique of Munshi Abdullah again, and still, on the one hand, criticizes Munshi Abdullah for being perhaps too positive in his appraisal of colonial rule, but on the other hand still defends Munshi Abdullah as being someone who was sincerely committed to reform, particularly reform of Malay Muslim society. And so here is where you have the genealogy still. But you see, the Kaum Muda generation who began as activists, political activists, all that's left now are the residual traces of the ideas which circulate in academic circles. Chandra Muzaffar at UM, Syed Hussein Alatas at UM. The third generation after that, I was a student of Syed Hussein Alatas and Chandra Muzaffar. The third generation would include myself, Sumit Mandal, and a few others, but we are primarily academics now. As a social movement, all we can do is disseminate these ideas in our writings, and we try to reactivate in popular debate. But try writing about Kaum Muda in the vernacular Malay press today, and you will find a lot of resistance. It's still, despite everything, very, very problematic for us. Simply because the ground, and again I go back to the point I made earlier, this is the irony of the Strait Settlements. On the one hand, it was colonial rule, but it was in a sense, indirect colonial rule that offered a safe space. That safe space that allowed people like Syed Sheikh Hadi to write doesn't exist in Malaysia anymore. Because the good thing about secular colonial rule is it left religion alone. So if you have to reform, you reform. If you don't have to reform, you don't have to reform. If you want to create a Tariqat Matahari, create a Tariqat Matahari. If you want to create your modern reformist madrasa, create. That's fine. The state is indifferent. So this was perhaps the only time in the history of the Malay Peninsula where you actually had genuinely secular governance. And this is the irony, that it is in this secular context that reformist ideas, not only primarily Muslim, but also Chinese nationalists, Indian nationalists, that's where it could emerge. That's where it could emerge. And that's why when you look at the Indian diaspora later on in places like Selangor, Penang, Selangor, Perak, in the States where you had large numbers of Chinese and Indians, you never had a mass movement there. But you had the Chinese nationalist movement in Singapore, Malacca and Penang. You had the Indian nationalist movement in Penang in particular, but not in places like Selangor. There were hundreds of thousands of Indian laborers, but they were under direct rule. Here, under indirect rule, they had space. They could organize themselves. So, in that respect, and we go back to that period of colonial history, Singapore, Malacca, Penang, but also Batavia, Medan, Johannesburg, Durban, South Africa. These were satellites, across the world where you had a connected cosmopolitan elite. And that's